Action!
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Johnson, and with me, as always, it's Frank Marchese, senior scientist here at SETI Institute, and this is the Grudge Report. We're continuing our special 10-part series on the best of Stargate SG-1. We're covering one episode per season as chosen by Stargate fans on gateworld.net, so thanks to them for sharing their list. This week's show is on Season 5, Episode 21, Meridian. And here we have the team coming back at the very beginning from P2S4C3, the planet Langara, which is a planet with civilizations about the technological advancement that we were in the 1940s. There are 3 of them. They are in sort of a Cold War state. Things are not pretty. And the gate, of course, is controlled by one of those civilizations. And this is a very important episode in the series for several reasons, both of which we will get to. However, I must give you all, this episode has a content warning. There will be the discussion of death. So if that is something you don't want to listen to, turn back now. And also spoilers. So, all right. You ready, Frank?
I'm ready.
All right. So our team has gone to this planet, but we see them right at the beginning racing back through the gate. And Daniel is holding his hand out and not letting anybody come near him. And it turns out he has been exposed to very dangerous levels of radioactivity. And the show kind of like solves the puzzle of how this all happened and what went down. We'll get to that. But we're introduced to a term that I didn't know and apparently is not in common usage here in America, in the United States, which is grays. So I've always heard of rads. And I guess there's a direct relation. Gray is what, 100 rads? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
So they say that he's been exposed to 7 to 9 grays of radiation. So when you translate that into rads, it's 7,700 to 900 or 7,000. It was a lot. I'm trying to remember the math because I had it written down. So.
But, I like this unit because it's an easy unit. And let's talk about this one specifically.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
I don't know about you, but I did a deep dive on radiation poisoning during this episode.
So we're going to lose you this show, right? So I would just like to mention that, first of all, we have discussion about radiation poisoning a lot in the Grudge Report. It's something that's come a lot in science fiction. Could be for multiple reasons, but in Discovery, we had that when they went to the nebula. And in this case, the radiation poisoning is coming from radioactivity. Okay, it's like the radioactivity from a source which is on the planet. It's kind of a different way of having a radiation poisoning. It's not coming from radiation from space. It's radiation from some material that they're playing with, which is obviously extremely radioactive. So maybe we should explain what radioactivity is first.
So radioactivity, of course, is when a substance breaks down from one molecule, one atom to another, and it releases energy in the process of that. And that energy is usually in the form of alpha, beta particles, gamma rays. They're not really nice to us. Mm-hmm. They pass through our skin very easily, but they also interact with our molecules. So they do very horrible things. And in the case of what's going on here, as it turns out, they're doing an experiment basically to make nuclear bomb. So think of it as a Manhattan Project style experiment. And something goes very wrong, and their project, the 2 substances come in contact with each other, and one of them, it's about to go critical mass, which I got to learn a little bit about what critical mass means. And basically what it means is it's hit a state where it can just sustain its own nuclear reactions without adding anything to it. And that's very bad because that means it's out of control now. And so that's what is happening here, is basically this whole thing is about to go critical mass, which means it's going to basically be unstoppable and destroy everybody. And there's a lot of stuff in this bomb. There's so much of this new substance that we've been introduced to. So what else did you want to say about that part of it, about our whole critical mass part?
No, I want to talk about the unit specifically, because I think it's a good unit to remember. I mean, if one day you face radioactivity, you should know what is a gray. He's been exposed to 8 to 9 grays of neutron radiation. That's what she says at the beginning of the show. Full body 7. So I look on my favorite encyclopedia, Wikipedia, and I got lost again in exploring the units of radioactivity because there is a zoo.
Right. I have a note that says, and again, yes, Wikipedia is your friend, a whole body acute exposure to 5 grays or more of high energy radiation usually leads to death within 14 days.
Yes. Yeah, so when you do an X-ray, you get 0.0007 gray. So that's a very small amount of radiation. So gray is the amount of radiation that reach your body. Because you need to be clear that when an object is radioactive, the closer you are from this object, the more radioactive radiation you're getting, right? What's happening here is that we have a unit, which is the unit kind of that reach the body. It's a detection unit. It's not like the becquerel is the unit that corresponds to the emission of radiation, and the gray is a unit that quantifies the dose of radiation received by a body. In the US, they use something called Sieverts.
Sieverts. Yeah. Sieverts or rad. We use, I mostly hear rad, but I don't work in the field, so I can only tell you what I've heard from just like classes and stuff.
So in this case, he got 6 to 8 gray or 9 gray. And if you look on the table, that's basically, it implies that the mortality rate is between 99 to 100%, even with care. So that's kind of
that's basically what it comes down to, right? They're trying to, they try to help him. So it's added to the fact that this isn't just like close exposure for him. This is contact exposure. So the reason he's holding his hand away from everybody is he has literally grabbed the mass of Nequadria, the pivot, the piece that they're actually putting into the bomb to make it work, that has apparently touched the sides or done whatever, caused its reaction. And he has literally pulled it out to stop it from happening, because the 4 scientists that were in the room with it were basically knocked out, and they are dying themselves. So they expire before he does because they were closer. It takes a little while, but he still gets this direct contact with his hand. So that's a huge problem, of course.
So, and radiation poisoning, you don't die right away. It's a very painful process. You die in this case in days, because what happens is this radiation destroy part of your internal organs. So you kind of lose they stop functioning basically slowly, and it starts with feeling sick, like having nausea, vomiting, and then it gets worse and worse. And of course, that's what we see in the show when he's in the hospital, and then it's completely covered with bandage because his skin is basically burned.
Right. So it's very awful, and he explains to Jack what's going to happen to him, and it's very ugly sounding, and it is the whole slow breakdown. And from what I was looking up on existing radiation accidents that we've had since our nuclear era started, the fastest one I saw was 35 hours, and they experienced 39 to 49 grays. Mm-hmm. So not very pleasant. And it's not an exact science either. So like someone who's had 100 grays has managed to last 49 hours. So it's not like there's some direct correlation. It's just basically how quickly your body is overwhelmed by the radiation itself. So his death in that short amount of time is not unheard of. This has not happened a lot. There's not a ton of data on this, thank goodness.
Yes. Yeah, the data. I mean, the data we have on this are sad data. In fact, there is Chernobyl, where people have received up to 5 gray, and you probably have seen the documentary where there is the soldiers who were moving the rod, the piece of by hands almost. Those were extremely radioactive. So those people die in a few days after. And then we have also the atomic explosion, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which unfortunately has been a way to kind of study the effect of radioactivity on human body.
Right. Although a lot of that, if you're as close to the blast as you were, the effects were immediate. And having seen just in the show and reading about it, thank goodness. Like, you really want, honestly, be as close as possible to the nuclear bomb, or as far away as possible.
Yeah.
Like, anything in the interim is terrible. So this was a very difficult episode for a number of reasons. I mean, you have Daniel who is dying, and you have this radiation poisoning, and you're watching it basically happen. And they didn't really pull any punches on this either, right? So they show like skin lesions and them bandaging him up and trying to clean him up, and they're basically saying all we can do is put him on painkillers and wait. I mean, that's it. That's all they can do. So they're just trying to give him some level of comfort. And all of this is because of Naquadria. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about that. It's basically just a highly radioactive form of naquadah, which is what they use for energy and what the Stargates are made out of, if I remember correctly, and that kind of thing. So it's a very important element in all of this, but this happens to be the very radioactive version of it, which here we would just call that an isotope, right? Like,
that's
that would just be
it. That's what I understood too. Meaning that it's the same number of proton, but he has a different number of neutron. So when it decays,
which makes it unstable.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So
Franck, you mentioned you wanted to talk about the Marie Curie experiment. So
because
tell us about that.
Something interesting is that radioactivity always been linked with radiation poisoning. Even at the beginning, even when radioactivity was discovered, and they were basically experimenting and discovering the property of radioactive element, they started already radiation poisoning. An example I have is Marie Curie, Pierre and Marie Curie. They wanted to study radium and how to use radium. So they have to produce it. It was very difficult to find it, of course. So they bought a kind of an industrial element called pitchblende, which is some kind of crystalline structure, and there is uranium inside. There's very few of the radium in it, but there is some. And they basically had to grind, dissolve, filter it, do a lot of chemistry to extract the radium. And
keep in mind that at the time they didn't know the radium was there. They're finding it in the process of this.
Yeah. And at the time, scientists was writing their diary, basically explaining what they were doing, etc. And Pierre and Marie Curie write about this experiment and say how they were feeling sick, and it was probably because of the dust and the physical exhaustion, etc. But in fact, what they didn't know, they had the first symptoms of radiation sickness. They were
and Marie Curie would carry around a vial of radium with her. Like, she literally slept with it and wore it around her neck and kept it with her at all times. Which, looking back, like, from our perspective, that's horrific. But from her perspective, it was like, I did the thing. I discovered the thing. How cool is this? I'm going to keep it with me. And
they didn't really know the impact of radioactivity on human body. We discovered that slowly later on, of course, and it's very scientific. Like, they work on something and they don't realize the danger of it. They basically were excited about doing this experiment, showing that we can image bones and so on. This was a revolution at the time. Imagine the number of
She used it during World War One, right? She and her daughter went out and took portable X-ray machines to the battlefields to take X-rays of soldiers and help them possibly recover from their injuries. So this was very, very groundbreaking and very useful at the time.
So I read that the laboratory and the house where they were working are still radioactive, in fact.
Her journals are still so radioactive that they are locked in lead boxes. So, and they're like her stuff from their kitchen is still incredibly radioactive. So yeah, and that is eventually what killed her. Like, it was the radiation poisoning that caused her cancer. Mm-hmm. Her husband was probably suffering the effects of it as well, and it could have been what led to his stumbling out in front of a horse and cart that ended up killing him. So it's likely that his radiation sickness was making his mind not very clear, and so that could have led to that tragedy as well. So yeah, it affected everybody and their kids, obviously, because their kids, a couple of them continued to work on it too.
Yeah. The Curie family. Wow. Well, she got 2 Nobel Prize. I mean, doesn't that
exactly? And it's still a very useful and amazing achievement to this day. So obviously, because we've kind of put it in this episode to talk about what they're doing in Stargate. So science fiction, boy, it really can be influenced from all directions. Okay, so the whole tragedy of this is, and I will get to the other half of what you want to talk about as soon as I sum this up. The whole tragedy of this is that Daniel is severely radiation sick. He is not going to survive, and they are trying to find every way to make that happen. Sam has tried to use a gold healing device with a negative effect, in fact, and they finally get a hold of her dad, who comes back, and they're trying to do it. And in the midst of this, Daniel is dealing with an ascended, and basically ends up making the choice that he wants to become ascended. So all of this storyline externally is because the actor Michael Shanks wanted to stop. He felt like his character wasn't doing enough anymore, so he wanted out of the show. And this episode is not just a turning point in the fact that Daniel dies in it and actually convinces everybody to just let him go, and he ascends into this beautiful being of light. But we're introduced to the character of Jonas Quinn in this episode. And spoiler alert, he basically becomes the new Daniel, because in the process of all of this, so the reason this is actually a huge controversy and that there's a mystery is that when this happened, and we get this all through flashbacks, we don't know any of this at the beginning, but when this happened, Daniel's the one that broke the window to dive in and save everybody's lives, and basically killed himself. He sacrificed himself to save all of the people on Langara, or at least in Kelowna, which is the continent, the country that they're in. Jonas is a scientist, anthropologist, working for his government on understanding the gate, understanding the text. He and Daniel get along great on that respect. But they're trying to create a weapon of mass destruction, essentially. And Daniel is trying to convince them that this is a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. Trust me, we know from experience. Please don't do this thing. And it does beg the question. It begs several questions. One, they've kind of just bounced into this civilization that is technologically behind us, mm-hmm. with no real thought to, like, we don't get any backstory as to whether or not this was a good idea. They sent a mount through, so they've looked around, they've seen that it's a civilization. So somehow they've decided that even at this earlier stage of technology, it's fine to come and talk to them. And probably that's because, well, they found the gate, so they're starting to get an idea of what it does anyway. So maybe better to make contact with them before they try to make contact with somebody else.
Yeah.
But there's, as you point out, and this kind of refers to our Star Trek days, there's no real prime directive. Like, we don't really see one in place that says, don't do this. This is a terrible idea. And, here's where we draw the line. It's like, all right, line's flexible. We're going to go talk to these guys. So how did you feel about that?
And for instance, they go to talk to them, and they talk to the Kelowna, not to the other nation. So they already put kind of a disequilibrium into this world with this free nation at war. They come there and they say, "Oh, we are interested in the Quadria. We could do a deal with you." There is all this story in the back as well. Like governments from United States want to talk to the government of Kelowna to kind of reach an agreement to exchange some technology. Like it's completely out of bound. I mean, it's like going to see a nation evolve in the 1940 a war with two other on the verge of self-destructing and making deal with them. I mean, who does that?
And it's simply a matter of, well, the Stargate was there. Like that's where it was. So they got to claim it. I mean, which, if you think about the history, the lore behind our own Stargates, right? We definitely have that whole like, oh, well, it was buried in Egypt and there's this whole Egyptian mythology around it. And the United States basically went, ours, thank you, and left. Took it with them. We'll take that with us. That's fine. We'll claim that for ourselves. So, I mean, definitely Stargates come with sort of that. It's really, there's always going to be a little bit of a conflict of interest when the military gets involved into your science.
Yeah.
Obviously. So it goes from, oh, this is really cool and amazing stuff to, oh, that's military tech now. Thanks much. which is kind of what's happening on their planet, right? Like they have this amazing discovery, and the first thing they want to do is take this element that they've discovered and make a bomb out of it.
No, yeah.
Not to use it. No. We're not going to use it. We just want to have it to threaten people with.
Yeah.
That never goes wrong.
So, and it's also very interesting because this nation or this planet, the people on this planet I would call them the Lungarian. That's the name I made up. Sure. In fact, they have kind of a very interesting story where they do, I don't know if they have writing or they kind of remember something happened 10,000 years ago, and there was a gigantic explosion, an asteroid they thought it was at the time, wiped out the entire planet, and the few humans survived. And those humans become this advanced civilization of the equivalent of the 1940s, 10,000 years later. So it's interesting that the civilization that has already evolved from the ashes as another one want to basically experiment and do a weapon of mass destruction without even questioning. I mean, it's a very weird moment for me when I found out about that and how they casually explain the story of the planet, basically.
Right. They've rebuilt a civilization, but they don't seem to be terribly concerned about wiping it out another time.
And
right?
Yeah, exactly. It seems to be kind of, okay, let's try that. So go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was gonna throw it to you. You have a note in here about talking about our first atomic test.
Yeah. So talking about crazy experiment, I was looking around and I say, we have done that. We have done those crazy experiments as well, and not that long ago. I mean, I could not find a reference on this, so maybe it's an urban legend. But I heard that when they wanted to build the first atomic bomb, some scientists was against it because they thought that the explosion will be so powerful that it will wipe out the atmosphere of our planet, so destroying any type of life. That's an urban legend, maybe. That may be true. I don't know, but that's kind of show in the when we were experimenting with building atomic bombs, we had no idea what the heck we were doing. And right. I have two examples that I found out about. One is called the Starfish Prime. So Starfish Prime was the explosion, a nuclear test at very high altitude in space, basically. That's a bomb that exploded in July 9, 1962. So it was not that long ago. The bomb, the Starfish Prime, was detonated at an altitude of 250 miles, 400 kilometers. So very high above the atmosphere, basically. And they did that because they wanted to see what will happen.
We don't know. We're just going to send this atomic bomb up into the space and see what happens.
See what happens. And this decision was taken by the Atomic Energy Commission and the Defense Atomic Support Agency, whatever, in the US. And you know what happened? So the bomb blew up. They had launched rockets on the side to do experiment, to do measurement. The bomb produced an EMP, an electromagnetic
pulse. Okay.
So strong,
way stronger than
expected, that he wiped out the entire instruments around it. So they have almost
so they got nothing.
Nothing. Just a gigantic thing in the sky that basically bring radioactivity on Earth and also partially destroy the ionosphere. Anyway.
So if you really want to laugh, everybody, go look up a Tumblr about why the Federation of United Planets allows the humans to be the leaders, and this kind of stuff is why, because we're just basically the civilization of hold my beer.
Okay. So another test that I found, let's talk about the other side at the time. Also in the 60s, 1961, it's the Tsar Bomba. Also codename was Ivan, or AN602 is the official name. It was an hydrogen bomb. It was the most powerful bomb ever built, and that they exploded. Like, it was 1,000 times Hiroshima.
And is this the USSR doing this one?
Yes, and they launched that in the high altitude as well. But they wanted to see what will happen if you build the most energetic bomb and we detonate it. What will be the result of this? So the result is that people saw the flash everywhere in Europe, almost. There was kind of a seismic activity as well. It destroyed some villages around. I mean, they did that in the up north, but it was so strong that it basically destroyed. It made a crater as big as Paris in size, and destroyed cities and small villages around. So this is a kind of experiment that we human have done 60 years ago.
Just because
we wanted to see what will happen. And I'm gonna say I'm very upset about the fact that scientists were involved in this. Let's try that, because frankly, I mean, a posteriori maybe it's easier to say that, but frankly, this is disappointing that we have scientists who were involved in this project and did not seem to care about.
And this is your weekly reminder that scientists are human too, and prone to human failings. So yeah. Wow. Okay, well, you have taught me some stuff today. So we have definitely, we went down a very dark road this week, didn't we?
Yeah, this week was, yeah. I just wanted to remind us all of this, because first, when I was just sure, I was criticizing the people of Kelowna, but then I realized that 60 years ago we did exactly the same. So
right.
I wanted to remind people that we did that 60 years ago. Let's just be careful we don't do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. These are the things that when we say those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it, these are what we're talking about. These moments where we learned that these are terrible things to do. Let's not do them, please. So while this episode has been very, very rough and very dark, it kind of goes along with my week last week, honestly. I'm glad that we get to the end, and we end on this hopeful note that Daniel is going to make a big difference as an ascended, and I know from having watched it before, obviously, that Jonas Quinn becomes part of the team, because he has, as a reminder of what ends up happening. So rest of the summary of the episode, there's a government cover-up basically by the scientists. So the scientists try to cover this up. They don't want their government to know that they did this, because they don't want the funding pulled for doing the research.
Mm-hmm.
And the government, the military doesn't want them to have their funding pulled, because they want this weapon. And Jack goes and talks to, but they've accused Daniel of sabotage, which is really easy to do when they've compassionately let him go home to die, basically. Yeah. And Jack goes and talks to Jonas, and basically, in his own way, manages to change Jonas's mind about the whole thing. And Jonas comes through the gate with a significant sample of Nequadria, as much as he could get his hands on, and basically says, I'm an outlaw now. I can't go back. So That's why he's now going to be around, because he can't go back to Kelowna. And this becomes very important as we go on. But for right now, this is where we end with Jonas Quinn now at Stargate and Daniel Jackson as an Ascendant.
I watched the season, the 3 or 4 first episode of the next season after watching this. I say I really wanted to know what will happen, and it's a very interesting moment in the show because a lot happened here, and there will be consequences for the rest of the show later on.
Right. This is not the season finale for season 5, but it was the penultimate episode, so it set up how the finale was going to go, and It was a hard one. I cried again. Like, I even know what's going to happen, and I'm still crying. Like those moments where Teal'c and Jack are talking to Daniel when he's basically unconscious or lightly conscious, and he's hearing them in this altered state where he's talking to the Ascended, and so they keep appearing to him. And those were the moments that were really hard for me, and just the whole thing. It's like I know what's going to happen, and I know how it's going to turn out later, and still. I'm sitting there crying, going, "Wow, I really thought it wouldn't affect me the third time around. I was wrong."
So, I do remember when I watched it in France. This is one of the shows that I remember vividly when I watched it. I remember because this scientist died, and there is this moment where basically he got this weird form like of light, and I mean, it's a very important moment in the show, and I mean, we lost someone. It's because some of us were watching that every week, one episode every week, and the show was part of our life in the 90s, right? And
right.
Only no more Daniel Jackson. That's weird,
right? It was definitely hard for me. That's my favorite character. He's always been him and Sam, obviously. For various reasons, but I've always really liked that scientist who's, just definitely the nerdiest person in the room, just, blindly trying to solve all of the things that people put in front of him. Can you read this? Not yet. And, he will, but he's just, and he was important from the movie standpoint too, obviously, right? I mean, he's the main other character in the movie. So to get to this point in the series, looking back was very difficult at that point. And obviously we didn't know how any of it was going to play out then. It's easy for me to say, like, now, having watched it a couple times, I know where this is going, but it's still upsetting. So thank you everybody for coming on the journey with us on this one. Hopefully the next one will be brighter. I haven't looked at the list. I will let you guys know what it's going to be later, but it's obviously you can see the list. I link to it, so you can go check it out too. But we'll be back in a couple weeks with whatever season 6 throws at us. So thank you everybody for watching. We love having you watch. We love your comments. And also, as a reminder, we are a 501c3. So if you check the links out in our description, you can find ways to help support SETI and our science and our outreach like this. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Bye-bye.